the absence of the author. With Brecht, we might speak here of a real alienation, the author diminishing like a tiny figure at the far end of the literary stage, is not only a historical fact or an act of writing, it utterly transforms a modern text. Or, what is the same thing? The text is henceforth written and read so that in it, on every level, the author absents himself. Time, first of all, is no longer the same. The author, when we believe in him, is always conceived as the past of his own book. The book and the author take their places of their own accord on the same line, cast as a before and after. The author is supposed to feed the book. That is, he pre-exists it, thinks, suffers, lives for it. He maintains with his work the same relation of antecedence a father maintains with his child. Quite the contrary, a modern writer, scripter, is born simultaneously with the text. He is in no way supplied with a being which precedes or transcends his writing. He is in no way the subject of which his book is the predicate. There is no other time than that of the utterance, and every text is eternally written here and now. This is because, or it follows that, to write can no longer designate an operation of recording, of observing, of representing, of painting, as the classic writers put it, but rather what the linguisticians, following the vocabulary of the Oxford School, call a performative, a rare verbal form, exclusively given to the first person and to the present, in which utterance has no other content than the act by which it is uttered, something like the command of kings or the I sing of the early bards. The modern writer, having buried the author, can therefore no longer believe, according to the pathos of his predecessors, that his hand is too slow for his thought or his passion, and that in consequence, making a law out of necessity, he must accentuate this gap and endlessly elaborate his form. For him, on the contrary, his hand, detached from any voice, born by a pure gesture of inscription and not of expression, traces a field without origin, or which, at least, has no other origin than language itself, that is, the very thing which ceaselessly questions any origin. We know that a text does not consist of a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, the message of the author God, but is a space of many dimensions, in which are wedded and contested various kinds of writing, no one of which is original. The text is a tissue of citations, resulting from the thousand sources of culture, like Beauvoir and Pécuchet, those eternal copyists, both sublime and comical, and whose profound absurdity precisely designates the truth of writing. The writer can only imitate a gesture forever anterior, never original. His only power is to combine the different kinds of writing, to oppose some by others, so as never to sustain himself by just one of them. If he wants to express himself, at least he should know that the eternal thing he claims to translate is itself only a ready-made dictionary whose words can be explained, defined, only by other words, and so ad infinitum, and experience which occurred in an exemplary fashion to the young De Quincey, so gifted in Greek that in order to translate into that dead language certain absolutely modern ideas and images, Baudelaire tells us, he created for it a standing dictionary much more complex and extensive than the one which results from the vulgar patience of purely literary themes. Succeeding the author, the writer no longer contains himself passions, humors, sentiments, impressions, but that enormous dictionary from which he derives a writing which can know no end or halt. Life can only imitate the book, and the book itself is only a tissue of signs, a lost, infinitely remote imitation. Once the author is gone, the claim to decipher a text becomes quite useless. To give an author to a text is to impose upon that text a stop clause, to furnish it with a final signification, to close the writing. This conception perfectly suits criticism, which can then take as its major task the discovery of the author, or its hypostasis, society, history, the psyche, freedom, beneath the work. Once the author is discovered, the text is explained, the critic is conquered. Hence, it is scarcely surprising not only that historically the reign of the author should also have been that of the critic, but that criticism, even new criticism, should be overthrown along with the author. In a multiple writing, indeed, everything is to be distinguished, but nothing deciphered. Structure can be followed, threaded like a stocking that has run, in all its recurrences and all its stages. But there is no underlying ground. The space of the writing is to be traversed, not penetrated. Writing ceaselessly posits meaning, but always in order to evaporate it. It proceeds to a systematic exemption of meaning. Thus literature, it would be better henceforth to say writing, by refusing to assign to the text, and to the world as text, a secret, that is, an ultimate meaning, liberates an activity which we might call counter-theological, properly revolutionary, for to refuse to arrest meaning is finally to refuse God, and his hypostasis, reason, science, the law. Let us return to Balzac's sentence. No one, that is no person, utters it. Its source, its voice, is not to be located, and yet it is perfectly read. This is because the true locus of writing is reading. Another very specific example can make this understood. Recent investigations have shed light upon the constitutively ambiguous nature of Greek tragedy, the text of which is woven with words that have double meanings, each character understanding them unilaterally. This perpetual misunderstanding is precisely what is meant by the tragic. Yet there is someone who understands each word in its duplicity, and understands further, one might say, the very deafness of the characters speaking in front of him. This someone is precisely the reader, or here the spectator. In this way is revealed the whole being of writing. A text consists of multiple writings, issuing from several cultures and entering into dialogue with each other, into parody, into contestation. But there is one place where this multiplicity is collected, united, and this place is not the author, as we have hitherto said it was, but the reader. The reader is the very space in which are inscribed, without any being lost, all the citations a writing consists of. The unity of a text is not in its origin, it is in its destination. But this destination can no longer be personal. The reader is a man without history, without biography, without psychology. He is only that someone who holds gathered into a single field of all the paths of which the text is constituted. This is why it is absurd to hear the new writing condemned in the name of humanism, which hypocritically appoints itself the champion of the reader's rights. The reader has never been the concern of classical criticism. For it, there is no other man in literature but the one who writes. We are now beginning to be the dupes no longer of such antiphrasis, which our society proudly champions precisely what it dismisses, ignores, smothers, or destroys. We know that to restore to writing its future, we must reverse its myth. The birth of the reader must be ransomed by the death of the author.